Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I'm so excited to present the first episode of Sharif and Baba. This is my Mother's Day present. Okay, I don't know if it'll happen again, but we're going to enjoy it and run with it while we have it. So, assalamu alaikum. How are you, Sharif and Baba?
I can't look, I don't know where to look without feeling blinded.
That's okay. Your vision will adjust over time.
There's lights everywhere.
Yeah, so first thank you, Sharif, because people know that it was because of you that Baba finished the tafsir, and you were extremely patient to demand it for, 6 years?
6 years, I hope they know. I don't know if people know.
Okay, well, let's
set
the record
longer.
straight. Okay, let's tell them.
It was in 2012 that I first started listening to the old ones, and pretty quickly after listening to the old ones, I started, because I was living in Egypt, and that was during the period where I would email Baba all the time, and that's when I started badgering him that he needs to finish it.
Alhamdulillah.
So yeah, that was.
And you know, you're actually one of the longest students of Baba, because I have videotape of when you were like, I don't know, 6 or 7, and Baba would be giving the halakha when he started the tafsir back in 1996. You were 7, I guess, yeah. And you afterwards you would go up to the microphone and you would sing and do all kinds of great things. So you're like probably the longest student Baba has had, maybe. Okay, so what are we doing today? What are you going to talk about? Tell us about yourself.
Oh man, which aspect of myself? I don't.
Okay, what have you share with us like some of your latest, because you're really working on some important stuff now. Like the intersection between psychology and what you've learned.
Yeah, I always have, whether it's a social event or an official event, I always have a hard time talking about myself, because I think most people say I'm blah 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 and I'm a lawyer, and that doesn't really work with me. But that is true. I'm very fascinated by the intersection of psychology and Islam, and I think that psychology is a very politically motivated atheistic discipline that tries to pretend like it's apolitical and that it's objective to make itself a science, and so inevitably you have a lot of issues with the way psychology is formulated and the thought that it creates, especially when it comes to Islam. But it's here, it's a reality, and I think it's a reality that either Muslims are going to step up and meet, or they're not, and they're going to be swept in the currents of being defined by an other. And Baba's work with the tafsir, honestly, was probably the most impactful voice, and continues to be the most impactful voice in my life, that has guided me and actually opened my eyes to see that and to start to question the world around me and the thought that's being that's coming at me in school and media and other people, to actually kind of point the gaze back and ask, is this actually who I am, and what are you asking me to be? Is this in line with the Quran? Is this something that I think Allah would be happy about? And a lot of the time the answer was no. And so I feel like that discussion hasn't really happened in other Muslim spaces, but has happened largely through the tafsir and through usuli. And so I think that's probably the most important thing about myself, but in the context of this conversation. Do you have anything to say about that? To formulate it into a question?
Me?
Yeah, you.
No. I only respond to questions.
Alright, okay, fine. So we have to think of a question.
No, but this is good. I mean, just
How
you're answering her questions, which is good.
Okay.
how are you going to start a revolution?
I think the revolution's already started. I mean, honestly, I don't know with Muslims. The discussion about the topic of why are our mosques atrophying, why aren't the youth interested in mosques? And I think that this generation is becoming more and more disillusioned with BS, and becoming more and more disillusioned with how Muslims are choosing to discuss things. And so it's actually, I feel very positive about the future, because I think people are not, the majority of people, especially the younger people, are not happy with the way things are. They're not happy with the discussions that are happening. And so I think the revolution has already begun. And I'm really just here along for the ride.
Well, it's really interesting because, you're 16 years older than Mito, and so the things confronting your generation are very different than the things confronting Mito's generation in some sense. So I'm really curious about this conversation. Like, what would you ask Baba from someone, from the things that have concerned you in your generation, and, and your engagement, or people in your generation's engagement with Islam?
It's I feel like my generation is very lost, and is very angry. I think that we were told that if we played a certain game, if we did things a certain way, that life would turn out a certain way, and it didn't. It turned out to be a lie. And so understandably so, a lot of people are very lost and very angry, and feeling like something is missing. The suicide rate, especially among men, is unbelievably high. And I think on a very large scale, people don't know what to live for, and the ones that are happy are making a certain amount of money and enjoying a certain type of life. And I don't know if they're necessarily happy. And I don't even know if happiness should be the goal. I mean, I think that's part of the lie that we've been fed, is that the goal of life is to be happy, when the reality is, and something that Baba gave me in the tafsir on the Quran, is that life is multifaceted, and creation is amazingly diverse, and the human experience is one that there is happiness, there is turmoil, there is trauma, there is peace, and ultimately what defines you are your actions, and how you take care of the disempowered, what kind of society are you creating, what kind of family are you creating, is it a just one? And within that framework of justice, happiness isn't really the goal. Happiness is something that's fleeting and temporary and beautiful, but peace, I think the difference between peace and happiness really is within the framework of justice. Can I really claim that my life is great if I'm happy, but the poverty rate is what it is, or the unemployment rate, or the suicide rate, or the rate of illness in our society is growing, whether it's mental illness or physical illness. And so I feel like my generation, a lot of us are married, we're settling into our professional careers, but we feel like something is missing. And I am definitely not the person that should be speaking on behalf of my generation, but that's just as an observer, as someone who's seen things. That's what I've seen.
What do you think of, but your friends in your generation, Muslim friends, what would they ask Baba? What would you ask Baba on their behalf?
I would ask, in this country, in this time, what is the most important part of being Muslim? To expand that also, what do you think we're told is the most important part of being Muslim, and what is actually the most important part of being Muslim? And because I think many people feel there is a discrepancy, and that discrepancy needs to be understood and called out.
Yeah, I mean, what you're told is the most important part of being Muslim. I mean, there is with your generation an amazing vacuum. I think an amazing silence, because my generation, their top priority was trying to hold on to a cultural identity that marked them as the representatives of Islam, while trying to basically adapt themselves to white culture and gain acceptance into white culture. And so they wanted to be the Egyptian who's accepted by whites, the Palestinian who's accepted by whites, the Pakistani or the Indian who's... And the way that they try to gain that acceptance is through professionalism, to sort of demonstrate that they can play the game of being professionals and being valued as professionals, and say, accept me as a full member of society, but please allow me to be culturally Egyptian or culturally Pakistani or culturally whatever. And then when it came to your generation and the generation of immigrants generally, there was nothing persuasive about trying to tell your children about maintaining Egyptian culture or Pakistani culture or Indian culture or Turkish culture or whatever. And at the same time, there wasn't anything persuasive about being distinctly Muslim. So what it turned out to be is for basically to communicate to people, try to hold on to your Islam. Okay, so what is my Islam? And the default position of communicating to you what your Islam is was basically at the what they call orthopraxy, which is basically these ritualistic acts. So just, try to be white. That was the general, try to pass as white, and try to be like us, excel professionally so that the whites will accept you, and perform these rituals while you don't understand it very little, or you care very little about, Egyptian culture or Turkish culture or whatever culture, but try to perform these rituals because they're your identity marks as a Muslim. And obviously that didn't. The problem is that nothing maintains minorities like it's a cause or a call. So, if you're a Jewish minority and your call is, we have an obligation to serve Israel, to promote Israel, to make Israel thrive, to make Israel as great as it could be. If you're an Indian minority and unfortunately your identity is constructed around hating Muslims and hating the Islamic history of your identity, because India was Muslim for centuries, or eh, so what minorities, in order to have a sense of self worth, and in order to they there has to, and Islam has always been the cause, the championing cause of the downtrodden. It has always been about what in Islamic theology called istidaf, is that it appeals to the elements of society who are oppressed, who are disempowered, and it uplifts them. But that's not the way Islam was communicated to your generation. And because that's not the way that Islam was communicated, there's a real vacuum of meaning and a real emptiness and a real silence that's just deafening. And I think that that's precisely, any other form of Islam is going to eventually disintegrate and disappear. Because the Islam that is basically, be white, but just do a little bit of ritual. When Ramadan, fast Ramadan, or fast some days on Ramadan, or fast half days in Ramadan. There's a lot of, I meet a lot of Muslims who are professionals, they're lawyers, they're doctors, and they're sons of daughters of immigrants, and their Islam basically consists of, an Eid, they'll maybe go to Eid prayer, but that's pretty much it. Or, in Ramadan, they'll maybe fast the first day of Ramadan, or that's it. Something extremely, and so Islam has become really meaningless. And the pattern in ironically societies whose religion is consumerism, is the disintegration of everything other than consumerism, unless you can have a paradigm shift, unless you could come and say, we are not about being white and just live for consumption, or we are about something else, or something in paradigm shift. And I really think that's Islam. We live in a very inequitable society. Jews have focused all their philosophy of equity to a chosen land and a chosen people, summed up in Israel. But they're very accomplished people. No one can deny that most of the great artists, so many of the great artists and great thinkers and great philosophers are Jewish. But that's because I think this, driven by a cause, they are inspired people. They feel like, I have something to contribute to humanity because I have a cause. Muslims must understand that our world is sick, and it needs Muslims to become the champions of healing the world at every level. And for a Muslim child to be raised, you're not about this life, you're about God giving, bearing the inheritance of earth. All of earth was, especially because you are in the know as a Muslim. I really do believe that the way things are going right now will ultimately, we're heading to some great collapse. Environmentally, economically, it's not sustainable. But once that collapse occurs and there is a major turbulence on this earth as people try to reorganize things, are Muslims going to emerge with a moral program, or are they just going to be subjects of the chaos of collapse? I mean, are they just going to be those who suffer without a point or purpose, or actually bear a message for humanity? And I think Islam is uniquely positioned because, as I said, Judaism has focused all their efforts in Israel. Christianity has become the religion of the white man, the colonizing man. Whether right or wrong, Christianity has become the religion, the faith of capitalism, the religion of capitalism, and what is leading to the collapse. And Muslims are an unknown sum. You know, they have the history, they have the morals, they have the message, but they don't embrace it. And that is why I really think when you look at Muslims and you find that what Muslims are about right now is these ritualistic things, the hijab, or I really think it is sinister because it undermines the meaning behind Islam. Can you imagine a religion whose contribution to humanity is the exclusion of women's images or voices, or just basically keep your woman at bay? That's not a contribution. I mean, that is a formula for extinction. So, I mean, I think it's like, and that is why, like, I completely agree with you. Everything that I've read in psychology, but I'm not a specialist in psychology like you are. I mean, I haven't read as much as you have. But everything that I've read about psychology is that there used to be competing schools of psychology up till maybe the 1930s. And then post-Freudian psychology generally has become an atheistic religion. It is a religion because it really does believe in its own dogma. And its dogma is adopted with sort of Darwinian scientism. It sees itself as a science and as a bearer of truth. But these truths are thoroughly hedonistic in many ways. Mm-hmm. And psychology has become perhaps the most important secular religion, because capitalism is the religion of consumption, and all the victims of capitalism, where do they go? They go to psychology. All those people who are traumatized by capitalism, and all the people who get depressed and anxious and whatever, who do they go to that legitimate the system and that sort of calm them down and that talks them through it and by basically pacifying them? Mm-hmm. It's psychology. And so an Islamic rethinking, in the same way there has to be an Islamic alternative to capitalism, like Banu Sadr, I'm blanking on his name anyway, but also an Islamic perspective on psychology, because psychology is it's sort of like it has its hands over humanity's neck.
Yeah. No, it is. It's a religion. I completely agree with you. I mean, all of these things are religion. All of these systems of belief. People like to pretend that especially the anti-religionists, like to pretend
Yeah.
that there's a choice to not be part of a religion. But I think it's the way that a human being operates. Is you have to have a religion, whether that's capitalism or psychology or your culture. You have some system of belief that you're using to define yourself and who you are and what life is about. And everything is philosophy. So it's very ironic that we live in an age where no one majors in philosophy, no one takes a career in philosophy very seriously, but we're still living philosophically.
But we philosophize all the time.
That's just because a human being is a meaning-making machine. You can't escape that. And if you try to pretend that it doesn't exist, then you're allowing yourself to be defined by something else, which is one of the amazing concepts that's in the Quran. Is you see Allah talking about that constantly, of the different cultural forces and the different tyrannical forces that are defining a human being, and trying to call you to reflect on this so that you can begin to define yourself under something that is more beautiful, under something that is more beneficial to you and beneficial to humanity at large.
There's the psychology of the Pharaoh and the psychology of the people that the Pharaoh engineers. And then the call of the Quran is, don't submit to the Pharaoh. I mean, in many ways, this is the summary of everything. It's like what the Quran is about is watch out for the pharaohs, don't submit to the pharaohs, because you lose your humanity. When you submit to the pharaohs, leave alone your hereafter. But that message, in order for it to have meaning, it needs those who study the Quran and study psychology, because that cannot be translated into the language of our age without that. So I really think, I mean, what you and people like you can contribute is just enormous. It's beyond, but it requires that, that commitment, that deliberation of thinking out of the box of modernity and all that modernity has, the religions of modernity, and the deliberate effort to produce a critique of, and as one thing I've learned about my psychology is that it is also a rather intolerant religion and a vicious religion, because for those who disagree with it is brutal with them, and so it's that's the irony of it. If you it's like if you critique the religion of psychology, it brutalizes you, and especially if you are not a master of that religion. So it's very easy to brutalize you and delegitimate you. So that's why a specialist in psychology is so critical, because these are the only people who can say, no, I know exactly what you are because I've studied you thoroughly, and I can speak your language, and I can respond to you in your language.
There's a book that I'm reading right now by Tariq Yunus. I think it's called The Muslim Mind and State or something like that. He's a Muslim lecturer on psychology in Middlesex, and he begins his book by critiquing psychology in that way. It's actually, and he begins it by talking about instances of Islamophobia in the West, and how essentially psychology, what it does, its main role, and he goes on in the book to demonstrate how this has been its role all along and continues to be its role, is essentially to, like you said, take people, the victims of capitalism, and set them right so that they can function again in capitalism.
Right.
And that was it's always refreshing to me to find voices that are saying that specifically within psychology, because I felt for a long time that essentially what psychology is doing, especially when it comes to maladaptive behavior or diagnosing people, I mean, obviously we have things like schizophrenia or obsessive compulsive disorder where there's a physiological aspect. There are people who are broken, but there's also things like depression and anxiety. And essentially, what makes me feel very uncomfortable is that I'm training to help people, and I feel like the tools that are being given to me to help people are ones that are gaslighting the person, to say that this is a problem with you and your brain, and when in reality I'm like, but the society they live in is harming them. So actually, isn't it a very normal and understandable response to be depressed? Isn't it actually a sign of health, or not? It's not a sign of health, but it's a sign of function, that you are functional if you are being abused and you are feeling anxious about being abused.
Right.
And then doesn't it actually become something unnatural to then teach myself to be at peace in an abusive environment? That actually feels very ugly and very demonic to me, because now I'm becoming habituated within an unjust and abusive environment, and learning not only to deal with it, but learning to feel at peace and to feel happiness from it. So now in the language of what we talk about a lot in the halakas, I'm gaining enjoyment from a demonic source. And that actually feels like then, the more natural thing, the more beautiful thing is actually to be in this, the environment that's abusive towards me, and to be depressed and to be anxious, because that's a reflection that something is not right here, and that's a voice that shouldn't just be numbed.
That's exactly it. I mean, the impressions I've got from just, I mean, subhanAllah, it's like reading, because I read what's the name of Freud's
Carl Jung?
Carl Jung. You know that I read a lot of Carl Jung, and the thing that just struck me, that in Carl Jung himself, I mean, if psychology would have listened or responded to his critiques of psychology, but you get like this was at a critical historical moment where the trajectory, it's like as if Jung himself could see where things are going and where they went. And I completely agree. I mean, I guess psychologists would say that they're teaching people to cope, but quite often if you cope with the demonic, it's not a sign of health. And so, but I mean, there are Muslims has stopped influencing the intellectual and moral trajectory of our world. Although, there are 2 billion of us. And in fact, I mean, to be quite honest with you, the world should even have many more Muslims than that. I mean, when you think about what Islam offers, but our impact is so minimal, and anyone growing up as a member of a new generation in Islam must be taught, you have a mission, and your mission is to contribute to Muslims mattering in this world, to contributing to bringing God's beatific view, the beauty of God to this world. And that cannot be done if you are teaching people to think at the level of pettiness. It's impossible for someone who's preoccupied with minutia to be a grand thinker. You can't have it both ways. It's not done.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I think, especially having studied the Quran that you did, and you've seen the Quranic perspective, then it allows you to engage psychology from a distinctively moral, ethical anchoring, that in theory, people from religious perspectives should welcome and should celebrate and should embrace. I mean, there, in theory, there should be a Jewish perspective on psychology, a Christian perspective on psychology, a Buddhist perspective on psychology. I mean, when you think of like something like Buddhism, which would have been positioned to challenge a lot of the secular psychology that exists, that is invading, but Buddhism became co-opted and in many ways Christianized. Mm-hmm. And I worry enormously that this is what is happening with Islam in the form of, Emirati Islam and the Islam that you are seeing, so financial. But you do your part, and then the rest is in Allah's hand, because that's all we can do.
Yeah. That makes me, I was thinking about this early on when you first started talking. You obviously remember that I used to I used to teach yoga.
Yeah.
And one of the parts of that experience that bothered me is that, I think as a physical discipline, it is so useful. It's beneficial to me just movement is something that's very beneficial.
Yeah.
But the culture, not all yoga studios are like this, but the culture at that yoga studio there was almost this gurudom that started to develop.
Oh,
right.
right.
There was the teachers, some teachers, not all teachers, but there was this culture, and it was a habit that you give a spiritual talk, guiding people, and even just in general. So there was this how do I put it, this environment of coping, of dealing with my stress and reorienting myself. So although it was a physical discipline, it also was a spiritual discipline, and people found a sense of spiritual centering. And while I do think that it is a byproduct of the West to separate mind, body, and spirit, what I witnessed, or what I felt was that, like how you talk repeatedly about Imperial Islam or Emirati Islam, that it's almost like there is this capitalist Islam that is developing, because like what I see develop within places like different Islamic centers that aren't necessarily even concerned about hijab. They are much more concerned with something that is more similar to what I witnessed in the yoga studio, which is that I'm going to provide you, the whole point of this place is to provide a borderline amoral, definitely apolitical, individually tailored experience with Islam where you feel at peace. You come here so that you feel at peace. And the problem with that, in my opinion, is that you are then robbing someone's soul of 50% of experience. Everything is internal. So basically, and it's it's all born from this philosophy that I can only control myself, and so I just worry about what's inside of me, and and then Allah will control the outside, which is
exactly.
The whole problem with the whole idea that you accept the ruler as they are. And I see it as it's like very similar to Emirati Islam, but it's this thing that develops which is so antithetical to what the Quran teaches, because the Quran doesn't separate between your internal reality and the external reality.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, you are one, and you are. If if the external is sick, if people are suffering and starving, that's going to affect your internal reality. You don't have a right, and it's not even that you don't have a right. It's just that's not reality. The reality, it's you're blinding yourself and you're lying to yourself to think that you are not one body. That's part of the delusion, is that there's this separation.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, what do you feel? Because I think at this point, it is so it has been in our breakfast cereal, whatever the expression is, of milk, since we were young. That is our understanding of religion. How do we start to shift that consciousness within people to no longer look at spirituality and matters of the soul to just be an internal matter, but it also includes the external. In fact, maybe the external is somewhat even more relevant to what is going on inside of you.
Well, you know, just the way that ideas, philosophies, dogma work in human society, you have a cadre of people that keep an idea alive until something happens, Allah wills, circumstances happen in history where suddenly that idea that was alive and on the margin spreads like wildfire and redefines everything. If the idea is not kept alive, you snuff out the potential when the moment comes. So I don't know. I mean, when I look at our world, I can't see how what I believe is the core and heart of Islam, because it is in all books of Islamic theology. It is all in the message of the Quran. It is in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. It is in what the companions and the family of the Prophet understood this religion to be about. So it's in everything. But the way that's all kept at bay is with very poor Islamic education. The way that you preserve this false Islam is that you make sure that people are not become very educated in the religion. The most critical thing is that the truth holders continue holding on to the truth so that it lives on. Because if it doesn't, then that is a disaster. And so I really don't know what will happen where finally people will say, I see, I am done with everything we've dealt with in the past, and now we're opening ourselves to this truth that we've kept at bay for God knows how long. I was surprised. There was one time that when I was invited to speak to the Muslim Law Student Association, and I was telling them that you have to understand that your Islam is not about just getting good jobs and getting rich as lawyers and charging your clients whatever hours you're charging them and then living in a... And I was telling them that you have a cause. You have a cause as to how you impact and how you affect the law for the benefit of all of humanity. And I was really surprised that all these kids, all these young law students who were just about to enter the professional field, I can say that the response was horrible. I mean, I could feel like it meant nothing to them. What I was saying practically meant nothing to them. And that what they, in fact, all they were thinking about is that as long as I do my salah, or what they call it namaz, or do whatever, however they define the rituals of Islam. No, what I'm about is that I want to go get a job and just make money, and that's what. But as long as this Islam continues surviving in testimony, the Emirati Islam, the capitalist Islam, the amoral Islam will never win, because there will always be that time when the amoral road collapses onto itself. And that's just how history works. That's how the history of ideas work. It is, I mean, that a huge responsibility lays on the shoulders of people who have money. Because people who have money are supposed to realize this and fund institutions that keep the moral Islam, the ethical Islam, the Islam was a pioneering message, alive. There's no way we can force them to do that. But as long as it survives, it exists. And there is the potential and the possibility and the promise when Allah wills. I mean, that is what you live for. And so for whatever, for instance, you eventually can write about Islam and psychology, whatever you can contribute, it might happen in your lifetime where it suddenly catches on, the tipping point as we call it, and you suddenly find that everyone is embracing these ideas like wildfire, or it might not happen in your lifetime. But rest assured, it will happen as long as it's kept alive. It just Allah's sunnah that, because if it wasn't, humanity would have become extinct a long time ago. If humanity didn't embrace the good at times and uplift itself and then crumble back again, but if humanity didn't have this up and down motion, we would have destroyed ourselves, ages ago, and we'd have vanished. And that's not going to happen till the final day, when we truly vanish. But in order for us to exist, that motion of morality, of up and down, must be sustained. But it requires, and that is why I really believe that the way Allah rewards the pioneers that preserve the moral grain, that's why Allah elevates them so highly in the hereafter, is because they maintain the pulse of life, the very nerve of morality and the very nerve of beauty. And that is why, I mean, if your iman gets, you realize that your comfort and your strength and your consolation and your assurance come directly from Allah. It's like Allah constantly is speaking to you and telling you, just persevere. I know it's really hard. I know you're alone, but keep at it. I think that's critical for any person with a real moral project.
Yeah. One of the things that I respected the white people, the predominantly white people that I taught during the yoga teaching phase of my life, was their concept of abundance, of internalizing abundance, that wealth and in life in general was something that I don't have to enter life out of fear or out of a fear of scarcity, that these things flow, and they use it to attract wealth. You know, they use it to attract things that I don't admire them for. But I've always thought because I've encountered this a lot with Muslims, like what you encountered with the Muslim Law Student Association, and I've always thought, what if you had those two things met? Because I feel, especially Arabs, and not just Arabs, I think it's within South Asians, any diaspora, anyone who's not white, who is the children of immigrants, they almost download this fear, and they go out into life where it's like, I have to work really hard, or I am going to be a garbage man, and I am going to, and I don't, so it's like, I don't have time, and I don't have space. If I think about anyone else, then I'm going to be a garbage man, and I'm not going to have anything. And I'm like, that's so weak. You know, that mentality is so weak. So you don't actually have a relationship with an infinite creator who is merciful. You have a relationship with your concept of God is one that is very scarce, that doesn't actually have much power because he can't take care of you. And you're the one that has to put in the tons of work. And I always thought, like, what if all of the social justice warriors, and they're not even really social justice warriors, what if Muslims had that internalization? And if there's anything that maybe my generation can do, is to try and pass that on to their kids, so that when they go and become lawyers and engineers and doctors or whatever they do, they go into it with a mentality of abundance, that I'm going to achieve, and I don't need to worry about myself, so I actually have space to give.
I mean, that's an excellent point, because I tell you, I've never encountered a group of people that distrust life and distrust God as much as Muslims do. I mean, Muslims, you're absolutely right. Their attitude is, and it's not only, they're actually raised. I mean, I've heard parents say this to their kids. Oh, if you don't do X, Y, you're going to end up a garbage man. Well, what's wrong with ending up in a garbage? I mean, it's an honorable job.
I mean, someone is.
It's like
surface work.
It's an honorable job and an honorable. But it's the thing is that they're raised on anxiety and fear and distrust of, and I think that just a symptom of a colonized people, because you see it everywhere among cultures that were colonized for centuries. They're never the explorers, they're never the adventurers, they're never the discoverers. They're always the people who live in the shadows, always insecure and in safety. Why is the world that we live in, when you look at all the people who do all the exploration, all the adventures, all the discoveries, all the things that take risk, are not the colonized people, the dark-skinned people, Muslims. It's the white people who colonize the world. And I think that's where you really see the sign. I've even encountered it in Islamic studies, and you find white kids specializing in Islamic studies, and the way they talk, I never hear them say, "Oh, we're worried about ending up being in the street." Mm-hmm. But Muslims, they are raised with, "Oh, if you go specialize in Islamic studies, you're going to end up living on the streets because you're not going to be able to make a living."
Yeah, no one's going to take you seriously.
Yeah. But you're absolutely right. I mean, and I like that expression, that their attitude about abundance, because that's exactly what it is. It's like, and that is why you find those same people undertaking adventures and undertaking risks that would be unthinkable for Muslims.
Yeah. So, in conclusion, let's get brave, people.
Yeah. let's get brave, people. Let's
start getting brave, because I mean, I I like, as you were talking, I heard Joe in the back of my head talking about Iqbal. So I know he'd be happy because that's what the poet Iqbal,
Yeah,
I
Muhammad
think,
Iqbal,
saw
yeah.
in his people, and he was constantly trying to get Muslims
Yeah.
to be excited and to be prideful of their existence and their religion and their identity, because that was the impact of colonization on his people. And that wasn't in the West. That, you know, that was, I think, in India, Iqbal was from, right? And I feel like that, I see that all the time here is
And
just,
subhanAllah, Muhammad Iqbal, like, it expressed it in his poetry time and time again. It's like, you, you're not going to impact the world if you through your fear.
yeah.
So,
Alhamdulillah.
okay, alhamdulillah.
This was amazing. Thank you so much. And Sharif, may you be one of the most important Muslim pioneers, because
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for this
in my
Mother's
own-
Day
in
present.
my own home. It
It was fabulous. I hope you will come again and do this again, because this was really brilliant.
This was
Alhamdulillah.
really
It's,
wonderful.
it's
Yeah.
always a pleasure speaking with you guys. It's always.
It's always a pleasure to accept your invitation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Good
Assalamu
night,
alaikum.
everybody.
Assalamu alaikum.